Hey everyone, thanks for checking out this retrospective. This is one I am really excited to make. It's one I've had in plans for a long time, but is a bit of an undertaking, and I really need to take my time to make sure I get it all done right. So that is the NES. The NES is the system that I collected for a long time. I had a near complete NES collection at one point, depending on who you ask. I was only missing stadium events and maybe 4 of the rarest unlicensed games. And the NES is a really special system to me. I think a lot of people are in that boat where it is the first console I ever had. It really introduced me to gaming. It had some amazing titles. It's an amazing system. Unlike my other retrospectives, you can't really shorten them down by talking about only exclusives, because I think almost everything on this thing was exclusive. And just because so many people love the NES, I'm probably going to include a ton of games that I usually wouldn't call notable, but I think this system really deserves a bit of a deeper look than we usually give in these retrospectives. So if you haven't seen my retrospectives before, I like to go through my collection. In this case, it's what's left of my collection, because it's all the doubles I held on to after I sold my big set, all my favorite games and the ones that are near and dear to me. And usually I like to figure out what games I haven't checked out that I wanted to, and what games I probably don't need in my collection anymore. At this point, I don't think that's really helpful for me because I have played and gone through all of these games while I was collecting, but I still want to share this with everyone. This is a labor of love for me, this set of retrospectives. So let's get into it with kind of the soft launch of the NES in 1985. In total, there are around 770 games released for the NES, and about 680 of those were licensed games. For this first series of retrospective videos, I'm only going through the licensed games. That's not a problem right now because no one knows the NES is going to be a big deal in 85 and there are no unlicensed games. But yeah, let's get started with a bit of a history. The NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, is basically what the Nintendo Famicom is called outside of Japan. The system was redesigned after it left Japan with several new features, but one major setback. Some great changes are the option for composite video out was added, so the video quality is a bit better than if you were using RF, and that the controllers were detachable with a decent controller length. If you haven't seen the original Famicom, the controllers can't be removed for it, and they have a really short cord. We lost some things, like there was a microphone on the second player controller in the original Famicom, but I don't think that really mattered much. The big change that makes the system hard to play with today is that the Famicom top-loaded the carts, so you put them in like you did a Super Nintendo. But when they brought it out over here, they added this loading tray, which I think frustrates a lot of fans. You put in your game, and then you have to push it down. And the problem with that is that it doesn't really contact properly all the time, whether it's an issue with the card itself connecting to the pins inside the tray or those pins lining up with the pins underneath. The thing would flash a lot, or you would just get some graphical issues. You know, people resorted to blowing in it to make it work, or you'd kind of shimmy the card around, try and, just get it at the perfect spot that it needs to be to work. All kinds of things people would try to get this thing going, and there are a lot of other options to play these games now, but that was a pretty huge problem shortly after launch. Fun fact, actually, it's still not as bad a problem as the Famicom had, because the original Famicom in Japan, they had to recall them all after the original launch and hold it up for several months. So yeah, this is, I guess, a little problem for Nintendo compared to that, but a major problem for us people who got really frustrated trying to play these games. Nintendo was worried that the NES wouldn't have a chance in North America after the video game crash of the 80s, and Nintendo did everything they could to differentiate themselves from the game consoles of the past. They marketed it as an entertainment system instead of a game console, that's where the name comes from, and they put it in the toy section instead of the electronics section. They also had a licensing program where all cartridges had to be produced by then, so they could monitor the quality of games. The NES had a soft launch in North America only in New York on October 18, 1985. The deluxe edition included the console, 2 controllers, a gray zapper light gun, Rob the Robot, his accessories, and the games Gyromite and Duck Hunt. Those deluxe sets, or just Rob with those attachments, are worth quite a bit, so if you still got those, good on you. Yep, so technically the original pack-in games, probably ones you didn't know about, Duck Hunt and Gyromite as separate cartridges. Let's get right into those, starting with Duck Hunt. Like I said, it's better known for its inclusion with Super Mario Bros. In later console releases, but if you don't know about it, the game is a series of duck shooting stages in which 1 or 2 ducks fly up onto the screen and leave if they're not shot down in time by the Nintendo Zapper. The speed increases each stage, and there's also a clay pigeon game included where the game shoots clay discs from the bottom of the screen and they just move faster and differently from ducks. I figure it's worth mentioning now, these light guns don't work on modern TVs, so if you're trying to play this today, you need an old CRT to get this working. Moving on to Gyromite, one of the only 2 games that work with Rob the Robot. The game has the player moving a professor through a series of puzzle stages, while Rob uses the Player 2 controller to manipulate the environment to help the professor get through the challenges, as well as avoid enemies. The game was an interesting concept, but overall it was easier to play with a second controller yourself or with a friend than using Rob. Another interesting thing about this is that the North American cartridge is actually just the Famicom cartridge internals added to a bigger gray cart. The game includes an adapter inside that if you opened up the cart, you could technically use it to play other Famicom games on your NES. So I think maybe some people were doing that at the time. Now you can just buy those adapters all over the place. It's pretty funny also because when you start the game, you still see the Japanese name. But so it's historically really interesting for those things. The system released with 15 other black box games. We call them that because basically the labels and the boxes are designed with these black design. They all look similar. There are a lot of collectors that go for just the black box games or complete black box game collections. This style continues into 1986, so it's around for a little while. And these 15 games basically came out around that same time of October 18th, whether it was a week later or 2 weeks later, no one knows for sure as these things rolled out, but they were all available that first year. So let's get started with some of those in mostly alphabetical order. The first one is Tenyard Fight. This was an American football game by Japanese developer Irem. It was the best console take on the sport at the time. Now it's not so great to go back to, but it was a good start for football games to come. Following that, in the same boat, was Baseball, the first of way too many baseball games on the NES. Baseball was a good launch title for fans of the sport, but still not worth going back to now. One notable thing is that along with 2 other sports games at launch, Baseball was designed by Shigeru Miyamoto, who went on to become Nintendo's superstar game designer. Moving on to the first game in what's left of my collection, not an amazing title, but one I still hold on to for its nostalgia. That is Clu Clu Land. This was a fun and interesting puzzle game for the time that features simultaneous 2 players mode. The game has the player dodging enemies while constantly moving through a grid-like maze where they can grab and swing around pegs to change their position. The goal of each stage is to pass through pegs, some of which highlight. As the player highlights more areas, they'll come to draw a picture, and once that picture is revealed, they move on to the next level. The player can also shoot enemies to stun them and push them around. Right after that is another game in my collection, and one I love and still love to this day, Excite Bike. This is one of the more notable launch games. It was a 2D dirt bike racing game where you sped through a series of courses. The player could move between 4 different tracks to avoid obstacles, hazards, and other racers, as well as hit boosts or line themselves up for jumps of different sizes to help build speed. This game also featured a track editor, but you couldn't save your tracks, so it was just fun to play with for a little while. Right after that, we got Golf, a decent golf game for launch that, like the other sports games, were fun for the time, but eventually surpassed by many other golf games on the console. This is one of the other games designed by Miyamoto. After that, to give the system a bit more light gun support, we got Hogans Alley. This was inspired by a light gun arcade game by Nintendo, which was based on the real-life shooting range at the US National Guard training facility. The game featured 2 modes and 2 settings of the range and town, in which the player shoots at cutouts of gangsters while avoiding civilians. The other mode was a trick shot mode where the goal was to shoot moving soda cans so they stay in the air until they enter a point area. Right after that, a co-op platformer that was not great but pretty interesting for the time and probably best known for its characters being in Smash Bros. Melee, I think. That is Ice Climber. This is an interesting take on the platforming genre. Ice Climber has 1 or 2 players avoiding enemies while jumping up the screen, breaking blocks above them in order to go higher and reach the end of a stage. The game featured 32 stages that each end with a platforming bonus challenge. The game was criticized for its jumping mechanics, which are really stiff, but I think it's still fun. Following that, a game that I have a ton of nostalgia for. I played this the most. It was probably one of the first NES games I ever got. That is Kung Fu. This is a port of the arcade game Kung Fu Master that's a pretty simple early beat-em-up, but one I loved. The game stars Thomas, who enters a 5-floor temple filled with enemies in order to save his girlfriend Sylvia from Mr. X. Thomas can punch and kick as well as jump and duck. Attacking while jumping or ducking changes the attack to allow the player to hit different enemies. Each floor ends with a boss fight, and when the game ends, it starts over with tougher enemies on each floor. Next up, another game I have complete, and one that I only picked up again recently because of what I read while I was doing this. That is Pinball. It's a basic console pinball game that was notably programmed by future Nintendo president Satoru Iwata. The game is based on a similar Game & Watch title. One really cool aspect is that it contains a bonus minigame where you control Mario carrying a beam trying to save Pauline, so it's kind of like a Donkey Kong crossover there. Following that, we got Soccer. The launch European football game for the system featured single and 2-player modes, options for different game lengths, and 7 teams from different countries. One interesting thing about this game is that it was developed by Intelligent Systems, who were now mostly known for Fire Emblem. Right after that, Stack Up, the second and last game compatible with Rob the Robot, is a strange puzzle game in which the player inputs commands on the screen for Rob to follow in order to stack a pile of discs the way the game wants you to. The game comes in a big box with all the extra pieces required to play it. The card alone is fairly uncommon, but the complete box with all the pieces is one of the rarest finds for NES collectors. The game sees the return of Professor Hector from Gyromite as a character, and features several modes which are variants on the same basic gameplay. Alright, now we get to the big release of the NES, the one that really made things special, Super Mario Brothers. A lot of people don't know this was released separately, but yeah, in that first year in the New York launch, it was released as its own thing, and definitely one of the most notable games on the system all around. This is the game that catapulted Miyamoto into the spotlight, a smooth horizontal scrolling platformer with amazing jumping mechanics, interesting worlds and characters, and a ton of secrets. The game sees Mario and Luigi from the arcade game Mario Brothers in the Mushroom Kingdom trying to save the Princess Toadstool from Bowser and his Koopa minions. I don't think I can say enough to do this game justice. It is one of the most influential games of all time, an amazing case study in game design, and overall still a blast to play. There's a lot of really interesting tidbits if you read the instruction manual about kind of what the story was before it got refined in later titles. But yeah, definitely just a fun game that if you haven't played it, I can't believe you haven't, but you should check it out. Historically, it is so important. Following that, we get Tennis, another one of the sports games designed by Miyamoto. It features singles and double matchers and 2-player modes where the players can be on the same team or against each other. It also has Mario starring as the referee. And we got our third light gun game after that, Wild Gunman. Just another light gun shooter, this one based on a Western setting, also based on a previous arcade machine. Definitely worth checking out if you're into light gun games, but I know a lot of people don't really get the chance now that, that light gun doesn't work on TVs anymore. And the last game for the year, and also the last game I have in my collection for this year, a really interesting Mario title that a lot of people don't know about, that is Wrecking Crew. This is a really fun, lesser-known Mario game that's a puzzle game in which Mario and Luigi are working demolition. The game features 100 stages, which are buildings that the player has to take down by destroying the walls, ladders, and avoiding enemies. The player can't jump and can only use the ladders to move up and down in those stages, so you have to be really careful about how you work through each level. And that is it for the soft launch year of the NES in 1985. Thanks for checking out this retrospective. Please subscribe and check out my other retrospectives. I'm going to keep doing these in the future, so stay tuned for more NES episodes and just episodes on a whole bunch of other consoles. Thanks for checking me out. I'll see you guys later. Bye.